Richmond, Virginia, where stately oaks lined the streets and old brick homes whispered of Southern charm, the Waller family was well regarded. Their home, a weathered two-story house with a wide porch and a tire swing that had long been abandoned, stood as a symbol of their rooted presence in the community. To neighbors, the Wallers appeared as a typical close-knit family, but beneath the veneer of normalcy lay a dark, unsettling truth that would eventually unravel them. Dana Waller, 35, was the eldest child, a nurse at the local hospital. She was known for her gentle smile, her nurturing ways, and her dedication to her patients. Her younger brother, Marcus, 33, was a skilled auto mechanic whose strong hands and quiet demeanor had earned him a steady clientele. They were the picture of sibling support, always seen together at family gatherings, church events, and community functions. But what no one knew was that Dana and Marcus shared a bond that went far beyond the bounds of familial love. It had all started innocently enough when they were teenagers, a time when they relied on each other for comfort and support. Their parents, strict and traditional, had enforced rigid boundaries, but the bond between Dana and Marcus only grew stronger in the face of such constraints. They shared secrets, dreams, and fears, things they never told anyone else. Dana was Marcus's protector, and Marcus was Dana's confidant. They spent hours talking, their closeness deepening in ways that neither fully understood at the time. But as they entered adulthood, that closeness began to shift into something more complicated. It was during a summer evening after a family barbecue that the first line was crossed. They had been sitting on the porch, the air heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant hum of cicadas. The conversation had turned to relationships. How difficult it was to find someone who truly understood them. Dana, in a moment of vulnerability, admitted that she felt more connected to Marcus than anyone else in her life. Marcus, emboldened by her words and perhaps by the few beers he had consumed, leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief, tentative kiss, one that they both immediately regretted, or at least told themselves they did. They pulled away, shocked at what had just happened, but neither could deny the spark that had ignited between them. They tried to laugh it off, to pretend it was nothing, but the line had been crossed and there was no going back. What followed was a slow, torturous descent into forbidden territory. They would steal moments alone, away from the watchful eyes of their parents and the community. At first, it was just physical, a way to explore the unspoken connection they had always felt. But as time passed, their affair became more intense, more consuming. They were drawn to each other like moths to a flame, knowing full well that they were playing with fire. Dana was the first to feel the weight of their actions. She knew it was wrong, that their relationship was something that should never have been, but she couldn't stop. The thrill of the forbidden, the secrecy, and the intensity of their bond were intoxicating. Marcus, too, was caught in the web they had spun. He loved Dana in a way that defied logic and reason, and the idea of losing her was unbearable. They developed a routine, meeting in secret whenever they could, late at night when the rest of the world was asleep, in the hidden corners of their childhood home, and even in Marcus's small apartment on the other side of town. Every encounter was a mix of passion and guilt, the euphoria of being together quickly overshadowed by the crushing reality of what they were doing. The affair began to take a toll on Dana. The once confident and caring nurse started to withdraw from her friends and colleagues. She became irritable, her mood swinging. From elation to despair at work, she would sometimes find herself lost in thought, replaying moments with Marcus in her mind, and then be jolted back to reality by the pang of guilt that followed. Her drinking increased as a way to numb the conflicting emotions that tore at her soul. Marcus, on the other hand, buried himself in his work, trying to push down the growing unease that gnawed at him. But no matter how many cars he fixed or how many hours he spent in the garage, he couldn't escape the thoughts of Dana, of the life they had secretly built together. A life that could never be known to anyone else. Their relationship, once a source of comfort, had become a burden too heavy to bear. They knew they were spiraling out of control, but the fear of losing each other kept them trapped in their destructive cycle. And as much as they tried to ignore it, the truth was inevitable. Something had to give. And when it did, it would shatter everything. As the years passed, the weight of Dana and Marcus's secret relationship began to take a heavier toll on both of them. What had once been a forbidden thrill had now morphed into a haunting obsession. an addiction neither could escape. The clandestine meetings, stolen kisses, and whispered confessions that once brought them joy were now tainted by a growing sense of dread and paranoia. Dana, once the nurturing and composed nurse, had become a shadow of her former self. The stress of maintaining the facade of a normal life was wearing her down. She would come home from long shifts at the hospital and pour herself a drink, sometimes 2 or 3, just to take the edge off. The alcohol dulled the guilt temporarily, but it couldn't erase the shame that gnawed at her. She knew that what she and Marcus were doing was wrong, and the constant fear of being discovered was pushing her to the brink. Her moods became unpredictable. At work, she would alternate between moments of intense focus and episodes of distracted daydreaming, often replaying her encounters with Marcus in her mind. Her colleagues noticed the change but chalked it up to the stress of her demanding job. They didn't know about the sleepless nights, the internal battles, or the way her heart raced every time Marcus's name came up in conversation. At home, Dana was more isolated than ever. She withdrew from friends, avoiding social gatherings and family events. The excuses piled up: she was tired, she had to work, she wasn't feeling well. But the truth was that she couldn't face the world, couldn't risk anyone seeing through the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The only person she allowed into her life was Marcus, and even their relationship was becoming strained. Marcus, too, was struggling under the weight of their secret. The once easygoing mechanic had become tense, irritable, and prone to outbursts of anger. He threw himself into his work, taking on more jobs than ever before, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the thoughts of Dana. The love he felt for her was consuming him, twisting his perception of reality. He told himself that they were different, that their love was special, but deep down he knew they were living a lie. The breaking point came one evening when Dana showed up at Marcus's apartment unannounced. She was visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling. Marcus, who had been working late in his garage, was surprised to see her there. She rarely visited him at his apartment anymore, preferring the secrecy of their childhood home, where they felt safer. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, concern etched on his face as he guided her inside. Dana didn't answer immediately. She paced the small living room, her mind racing as she tried to find the words to express the turmoil inside her. Finally, she stopped and turned to face Marcus, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, Marcus was silent, trying to process what she had just said. When the reality of the situation hit him, he felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Are you sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Dana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I took the test this morning. There's no doubt about it." Marcus's mind raced, a million thoughts crashing into each other. How could this have happened? How could they have been so careless? But more importantly, what were they going to do now? The pregnancy was something they couldn't hide, a ticking time bomb that threatened to expose their dark secret to the world. "We have to do something," Dana continued, her voice trembling with panic. "We can't let anyone find out. It would destroy us." Marcus could see the fear in her eyes, and he felt it too. But beneath the fear was something darker, a sense of doom that he couldn't shake. For years they had been playing with fire, and now it had finally caught up to them. There was no easy way out, no way to undo what had been done. "We need to think this through," Marcus said, trying to calm her down, though his own heart was pounding in his chest. "There has to be a way to fix this." But Dana was beyond reason. She had spent the entire day in a state of panic, imagining all the ways their lives could unravel if the truth came out. Her mind kept returning to one thought: they were trapped and there was no escape. As the days passed, the tension between them grew. Dana became increasingly erratic, her emotions swinging wildly from one extreme to the other. She would call Marcus in the middle of the night, sobbing, begging him to help her figure out a way to deal with the situation. But no matter what solutions they discussed, none of them seemed plausible. They were stuck and the walls were closing in. Dana's mental state began to deteriorate rapidly. She stopped going to work, too afraid to face her colleagues, terrified that someone would notice the change in her. She isolated herself in the house, avoiding all contact with the outside world. The guilt and fear had consumed her completely, and she was spiraling out of control. Marcus tried to be there for her, but he was struggling too. The pressure was unbearable, and he found himself lashing out in frustration. He blamed Dana for the situation they were in, even though he knew deep down that it was just as much his fault. Their once strong bond was now fraying at the edges, and the love they had shared was being replaced by resentment and fear. The situation reached a boiling point one evening when Dana confronted Marcus with an ultimatum. They were sitting in the dimly lit kitchen of their childhood home, the atmosphere thick with tension. Dana had been drinking again, and her eyes were wild with desperation. "We have to do something," she insisted, her voice slurred and frantic. "We can't keep living like this. It's going to destroy us." Marcus stared at her, his jaw clenched in frustration. "And what do you suggest we do, Dana? We're in this mess because of our own choices. There's no easy way out." Dana's eyes filled with tears, but they quickly turned to anger. "You don't get it, do you? We're running out of time. If we don't do something now, we're going to lose everything." Marcus stood up, his patience finally snapping. "And what exactly do you want me to do? Magic it all away? We're stuck, Dana. There's no fixing this." Dana slammed her glass down on the table, the liquid splashing over the edge. "You don't care. You're just going to let this happen, aren't you? You're going to let everything fall apart." "Of course I care," Marcus shouted back, his voice echoing through the empty house. "But I'm not a miracle worker. We've dug ourselves into a hole and there's no way out." Dana's face contorted in rage and she lunged at Marcus, pounding her fists against his chest. "You promised you'd always protect me. You promised we'd be together no matter what." Marcus grabbed her wrist, stopping her from hitting him again. "I'm trying, Dana, but this is too much. We've gone too far." For a moment they just stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of their situation pressing down on them both. Finally, Dana pulled away, her anger dissipating into a hollow despair. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice broken. "I can't live like this. It's tearing me apart." Marcus watched her, his heart breaking as he saw the pain in her eyes. He wanted to help her, to make everything better, but he didn't know how. He was just as lost as she was, and the realization that there was no way out left him feeling helpless and defeated. Dana sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I don't know what to do," she murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. "I don't know how to fix this." Marcus didn't have an answer. The love that had once brought them so much joy had turned into a curse, and there was no escaping it. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't wake up. As the night wore on, Dana and Marcus sat in silence, the weight of their predicament hanging heavy in the air. The bond that had once been their salvation was now their undoing, and they both knew it. But neither was willing to let go. Even as the darkness closed in around them, their love, once a secret they had cherished, had become a burden too heavy to bear. And as the days passed, it became clear that something would have to give. They were on a collision course with disaster, and when it finally hit, it would destroy them both. The night that sealed Dana and Marcus's fate was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that bites into your skin and settles deep in your bones. The wind howled through the barren trees outside the Waller family home, a sound that mirrored the turmoil inside the house. Dana had been drinking again, trying to numb the overwhelming despair that had consumed her. Her mind was a chaotic swirl of fear, guilt, and the growing certainty that there was no way out of the situation they had created. Marcus arrived at the house late that night after spending hours trying to escape his thoughts in the noisy confines of a bar. But no amount of alcohol could drown out the relentless voices in his head, telling him that they were doomed. He knew he shouldn't go to Dana's that night. His emotions were too raw, his nerves too frayed, but he couldn't stay away. He had to see her, had to find some way to fix the unfixable. When Marcus walked through the door, the house was eerily silent, save for the creaking of the floorboards under his feet. Memories of their childhood played in his mind like a broken record. Happy times, carefree moments that now felt like they belonged to another life. The weight of the past pressed down on him as he made his way to the kitchen, where he found Dana sitting at the table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of her. She looked up when he entered, her eyes bloodshot and hollow. "You're late," she said, her voice slurred but laced with accusation. "I had to clear my head," Marcus replied, though he knew it was a futile effort. Dana scoffed, taking another swig from the bottle. "What's there to clear? We're trapped, Marcus. There's no getting out of this." Marcus didn't respond. He walked over to the table and sat down across from her, the air between them thick with tension. He wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but it felt as though a chasm had opened between them, one that even their bond couldn't bridge. "We need to talk about what we're going to do," Marcus said after a long silence, his voice barely above a whisper. Dana looked at him, her expression a mix of desperation and defeat. "Do what? What can we do? I'm pregnant, Marcus. There's no hiding that. People are going to find out, and when they do..." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Marcus swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation crashing down on him. "Maybe we should leave," he suggested, though even as he said it, he knew it was hopeless. It was a weak plan. "We could go somewhere far away, start over where no one knows us." Dana shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "And then what? Live our lives in hiding, constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for the truth to catch up with us? That's no life, Marcus. That's just prolonging the inevitable." The despair in her voice cut through Marcus like a knife. He had always been the strong one, the one who held things together when everything else was falling apart. But now he felt powerless, unable to protect Dana from the dark reality they had created. "We could," Marcus began, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. The truth was he didn't have any answers. They had crossed a line long ago, and now there was no turning back. Dana's tears began to fall freely, and she buried her face in her hands. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus. I can't keep pretending that everything is going to be okay. It's not. We're trapped, and it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart." Marcus felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He reached out to take Dana's hand, but she pulled away, her body trembling with sobs. The sight of her, so broken, so defeated, was more than he could bear. The woman he had loved, protected, and shared his darkest secrets with was slipping away from him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. For getting them into this mess? For not being able to find a way out? For failing her when she needed him most? All he knew was that he was losing her, and the pain of that realization was unbearable. Dana looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach into her soul. "Maybe it would be better if we just ended it," she said, her voice barely audible. Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Dana didn't answer immediately. She stared at the bottle of whiskey in front of her, her hands trembling as she reached for it. "Maybe it's better if we just end it all," she said finally, her voice filled with a resigned despair. "Together. No more hiding, no more guilt, no more fear." Marcus's heart raced as he realized what she was suggesting. "Dana, no. We can't. We can't do that." "Why not?" she shot back, her voice rising in intensity. "What do we have left, Marcus? What kind of life are we going to have if we keep going like this? We're living in a nightmare and it's never going to end. I'm tired, Marcus. I'm so tired." The desperation in her voice was palpable, and it terrified Marcus. He had always been able to pull her back from the brink, to reassure her when things got too dark. But now he could see that she had crossed a line, one from which there was no return. "I can't lose you," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Please, Dana, don't do this." But Dana was beyond reason. She stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair in her haste. "We're already lost, Marcus, don't you see that? There's no coming back from this." In a sudden, impulsive move, Dana grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. The glint of the blade in the dim light sent a jolt of fear through Marcus, and he quickly got to his feet, his mind racing with panic. "Dana, put it down," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "Please just put it down. We can figure this out." But Dana's eyes were wild, her mind a storm of emotions that had been building for years. "There's nothing to figure out," she screamed, her voice raw with anguish. "It's over, Marcus. We've lost everything." In that moment, something inside Marcus snapped. The fear, the guilt, the hopelessness, they all converged into a single blinding rage. He lunged at Dana, his only thought to stop her from doing something irreversible. But in the chaos, Dana swung the knife wildly, and the blade caught Marcus's arm, slicing through his flesh. The pain jolted Marcus back to reality, and for a split second he saw the horror in Dana's eyes as she realized what she had done. But the rage had taken over, and before he could think, before he could stop himself, Marcus grabbed the knife from her hand and, in a blind fury, stabbed her. The world seemed to slow down as the knife plunged into Dana's body, the look of shock and betrayal on her face freezing in Marcus's mind. He pulled the knife out and stabbed her again and again, the sound of the blade hitting flesh echoing in the silent house. When it was over, Marcus stood over Dana's lifeless body, the knife slipping from his bloodied hand and clattering to the floor. The rage that had consumed him evaporated, leaving only a crushing, suffocating grief in its wake. He collapsed to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her face, now pale and lifeless. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with sobs. "I'm so sorry." For hours, Marcus sat there cradling Dana's body, his mind shattered by the reality of what he had done. The love that had once brought them so much happiness had ultimately destroyed them both. The house, once filled with the warmth of family memories, was now a tomb, the air thick with the scent of blood and death. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the police arrived, alerted by a concerned neighbor who had heard the commotion. They found Marcus sitting in a pool of Dana's blood, his clothes soaked through, his eyes vacant and hollow. He offered no resistance as they arrested him, barely registering the words the officers spoke as they read him his rights. The world had faded into a distant, muted haze, and all that remained was the overwhelming grief and the cold, hard truth of what he had done. The trial that followed was a media sensation. The revelation of the incestuous affair between Dana and Marcus Waller shocked the community, and the gruesome details of Dana's murder sent shivers through those who heard it. Marcus, barely coherent during the proceedings, offered no defense. He was a man broken beyond repair, his soul crushed under the weight of his actions. The prosecution painted a picture of a man driven mad by his unnatural love for his sister. A man who had crossed every moral boundary and had finally snapped under the pressure. The defense, knowing there was little they could do to save Marcus, tried to argue for his mental instability, but it was clear the jury was unmoved. In the end, the verdict was inevitable. Marcus was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge, in a solemn and somber tone, sentenced him to death.